The Downtown Rams podcast is brought to you by Rams On Demand, Seat Giant, Vibe 305, and RWO, Rams World Order. Now enjoy the show.
Down the middle to the end zone. Whoa. Caught by Brandon Cooks. Shoot your arrows.
It picks. Nickel Roby Coleman throws.
End zone caught. Touchdown. Tyler Higbee. Cooper Kupp plucks it out of the air and gives the Rams the lead. LaMarcus Joyner returns to the lineup with an interception in London. 35-30. Robert Wood, first down 20. 10-5. Touchdown. LA. No, it's Goff who keeps it. And Goff goes crashing into the end zone. Aaron Donald almost beat the football there and comes away with his third sack of the afternoon. Met immediately in sack. Corey Littleton, have yourself a day. And he gets gobbled up. Savage has to eat it as Michael Brockers picks up the sack. He's decked by Ebukam. Picked off. Marcus Peters strutting his stuff. Mark Barron the last 4 weeks has been a Pro Bowler. He picked off Dak Prescott into Seattle territory, into the clear. 30, 20, Farrell Cooper 10. Farrell Cooper at the goal line.
Cousins sacked. Ndamukong Suh. Of all the guys, it's the rookie John Franklin Myers who knocks it out of Cousins' right hand.
Todd Gurley, 20, 10. Gurley for MVP. Touchdown LA.
Welcome back, guys, to another Downtown Rams podcast. It's episode 143, and we are live. Kind of by choice, but I really just felt I needed to kind of go out there. I don't have Joe on the show today. He is obviously unavailable. I'm kind of doing a live podcast at 12:43 a.m. on the East Coast, but Sunday Night Football, Rams lose 30-23. Appreciate you guys tuning in. This is a really heartbreaking loss, and mainly, I would say, because the Rams ended up making it so much closer at the end. Thought the Eagles really played a nice game. Obviously the offense wasn't, Nick Foles wasn't exactly unstoppable or anything like that. I mean, when you look at what they did with Nick Foles, they basically played a more conservative approach of a game with Foles, kind of similar to how the last game was won in the Coliseum a year ago. But really, Nick Foles did a nice job of not really turning the ball over until the end. He threw that interception to keep the lead. But no sacks. Comes away with an 89.4 passer rating, 270 yards passing, that one interception, but, he really he did what the Eagles asked him to do. The game plan was a little strange, on the Eagles' part. Obviously, they ran 30 times, but, we've seen in recent weeks, if you've been watching the whole NFL as a whole, Josh Adams has really been the go-to guy for the Eagles, and, in this game, he gets in the end zone, but I thought the Rams did a nice job bottling him up. Only 1.9 yards a carry, 15 carries for 28 yards. Obviously, he had the touchdown, but, I thought they did a nice job with him. Really, the interesting thing was that, Darren Sproles, they ran it 3 times with him for 30 yards, and then, Wendell Smallwood had success on the ground, 2 touchdowns and 48 yards rushing, 4.8 yards per carry. Really, the guy who tormented the Rams, even though he didn't get in the end zone, was Alshon Jeffrey on 8 catches, 160 yards. He was the big play, and they brought up earlier in the show, during the game, Jared Goff was 0 of 2 in passes past 20 yards or more, and Nick Foles was really thriving off the deep passing game. So they kept it conservative, and then they would throw a couple passes deep down the field, and it worked out. Obviously, the infamous, it looked like a fair catch. It looked like there were 2 punt returners back there. 2 wide receivers got behind the secondary, and they were just waiting. Jeffrey came down with that. And, really, Jeffrey, he's been one of those receivers, limitless potential, it seems like, but he's struggled to be the number 1 receiver in Philly, and he really had himself a day. He hurt the Rams. Golden Tate, who's normally a Ram killer, going back to his days with Seattle, I thought they did a nice job with him. Only 43 yards given up. He caught all 5 of his targets, though. Zach Ertz, you talk about the Rams defense really giving up the big play and giving up a ton of yards to tight ends. I mean, you saw Levine Toilolo go for 90-plus yards as a blocking tight end for the Lions. And then, obviously Jared Cook earlier in the season. Last week they didn't do so much. I don't really think they were outplayed by Trey Burton, but this week they kind of held Zach Ertz in check. He had 7 targets and only caught, reeled in 3 of them for 22 yards. So I was impressed with the way they handled him. And then, I really felt like the X factor going in this game was Dallas Goedert, because I expected them to key in on Zach Ertz early on, and I expected Dallas Goedert to get like a huge play, and then his confidence, boosts, and then they kind of just, rely on him. It wasn't so much the case. I'd say the most dangerous Eagle on this team was Fletcher Cox. He was throwing around Rams offensive linemen like it was his job. Very disruptive. There was one play where he literally steamrolled center John Sullivan. It was just not, obviously it wasn't the greatest of games for the Rams offensive line, who have now had 3 questionable games, and that kind of goes along with Jared Goff. And, we'll get into that more, just kind of outlining this game. I mean, Fletcher Cox, the stats don't really show it, because he ends up with, 3 tackles. He had a sack. He had a tackle for a loss. He had the 2 quarterback hits, but Fletcher Cox created a ton of pressure and, really made this game, harder for Goff. I didn't think Goff played as bad as he did, obviously, last week, because last week that was by far the worst game I've seen him play. But it wasn't a good game by any stretch. And, a lot of that, it comes down to, there were some miscues on Goff. He missed some key throws. I pointed out that he missed the Gerald Everett throw. I was definitely going to make the argument that, he left a lot of throws on the field for sure, and this game might have been a little different. But at the same time, this offensive line didn't do him a ton of favors. And the defense early on didn't really do him a ton of favors. Obviously they were getting run on and, the big plays, but, overall the craziest thing about this defense, they give up 30. But in reality, this defense didn't play all that bad. Now they had the big splash plays where they looked lost, but for the most part, they really shored up the run game. When you look at 111 yards given up on 30 carries, that's a 3.7 average. And to me, I kind of look at that and I think that's not a bad day. Yards per carry is overrated for sure. It's a skewed stat, and I get that. They give up 3 touchdowns, but they were all, touchdowns in the red zone, goal line, whatever you want to call it. They gave up close proximity touchdowns. They didn't give up the big run that they've been giving up consistently, that they've given up to Tariq Cohen and, guys like that. But, I did think the Rams defense, albeit giving up 30, didn't play that bad. The second half was definitely, it was a tale of 2 halves, and they got a turnover, and they got a really key stop. And unfortunately, that huge stop that they get, they leave so much time on the clock. Everything's looking great. They get the punt. They're down a possession, and then, JoJo Natson, unforced error, fumbles the ball. And it's funny, before that ball was punted, I was thinking to myself, he's been fair catching this whole game just about. This will be the one where he, somehow muffs it or something. That's kind of how I think now, because I was thinking, JoJo Natson is due. He has not fumbled he's not fumbled a punt or a kick or anything like that. That I know of in his career, because I know he was with the Jets for a short amount of time, but I don't know how long he played in the actual NFL. So, that's one of the things that, I think definitely needs to be said. But at the same time, it's like, it's not JoJo Natson's fault that the Rams needed him, to not fumble or this game would be over. At the same time, obviously, he has to make his, move and get down or, fair catch it. But, you have a punt returner in there to be a game breaker. I mean, we've seen it in the past, going back to the Jeff Fisher era with Patrick Peterson. You punt Patrick Peterson the ball in overtime. It takes you get so long to overtime. You hold Arizona on the last drive, and then Arizona, 4:00 game. I remember this towards the end of the year. Patrick Peterson takes the ball to the house. That's kind of it's one of those things where you have that guy in there to be your equalizer. And Pro Football Focus ranked the top returners in the league, punt returners, and JoJo was in the top 5. So, he's obviously capable of breaking one, and I think, they did give him the green light. I don't think it was like Ty Montgomery, and, because Ty Montgomery did, he brought it out and he fumbled, but this was different. Ty Montgomery, that was a turnover, that was a takeaway against Green Bay. Ramik Wilson made a nice play, ripped the ball out. This was unfortunately an unforced error, and those hurt more than anything because Rams fans know, going back to the Falcons playoff game, there were 3 unforced errors in that game that led to the Falcons winning. And, I mean, it was a game where the Rams easily could have won that game. I mean, the Falcons did not do enough to really put them away. The Rams put themselves away, couple dropped touchdowns and, some miscues, obviously all of that. But, I just look at this and I think, this is immediately going to send everybody into a panic. This is going to be the panic button, thing. This is going to be the game that changes everyone's mind on the Rams and if they're a fluke. And, we're going to hear about how they're not ready for the playoffs. And right now, you could absolutely be right. But this is also, the fact is they just played Chicago on the road, tough environment. They lost. They played a desperate Eagles team, clawing desperately for a win. They now have a chance to win their division. Now, it's a very, very, very unlikely scenario. They do have to beat the Texans, but they do get the Cowboys at the end of the year, I believe. So it's unlikely, but I mean, it becomes a lot more likely if they beat the Texans next week. And it was really unlikely because a lot of people just didn't give them a chance against the Rams. I myself kind of fell in this trap, and the thing that is unfortunate is I felt like this would be a blowout because I just looked at the secondary and I felt there's no way, the Rams are not going to take advantage of this, broken secondary. I mean, Avonte Maddox, you got to give credit to him. I thought he did a nice job today. I thought he outbodied Josh Reynolds, a guy that they had out there to bring down the big play. And obviously, he comes away with the huge play that is down at the 1-yard line. And yes, he was a help, but I would have liked to see more effort trying to get that ball at the end of the game. I would like to see more effort trying to, get the ball earlier on the interception. I felt like, overall, Josh Reynolds, there's some good things that, to come away with, but there's also, a lot of miscues, and that's where you absolutely, miss Cooper Kupp. That's where you absolutely wish that target was going to Cooks or Woods, because Woods is Mr. Reliable. Cooks is your deep threat. And I will say this. I was watching, I was listening to some Eagles stuff just to get a glimpse, because I always like hearing what, the actual fans and the analysts and all that like to say about their team and where they think their deficiencies are at and everything. And, one of the biggest things that I kept coming to was that, Eagles fans were like, if the Rams know what they have in Cooks, this is going to be a brutal game because Brandon Cooks, the way the Cowboys stretched the field with Amari Cooper against the Eagles, they took into account, the deficiency in the secondary, and they just took them to town. Devontae Bosby in the back end with Avonte Maddox and, Rasul Douglas, and obviously Crayvon LeBlanc, they kind of took them to town. I mean, Dak Prescott doesn't throw for over 400 yards. The Colts shut them out today. That was kind of a statement game, but, that was also big on Amari Cooper, their big-time deep threat, being used vertically down the field, and the Rams didn't really do that a whole lot with Cooks. So I thought, a team that you see go deep down the field a lot, they didn't really go for any of those 50, 60-yard passes that you might see out of Goff. And it makes you wonder for sure. But I feel like that's one of the things that bothers me, because Cooks, I do feel like, has the speed to get by the second level of the secondary, and I think they should have at least tried one of those shots down the field. And, it's just really disappointing to lose on the last play of the game. To put yourself in that position, it also is a silver lining, though, because you have to take into effect they did the same thing with the Saints. They showed the ability to come back. The Saints, that would have been an instant red flag. If they got blown out by the first, legit team that they played, that would have been a red flag. But they didn't. They came back. They came roaring back, down 21. They tied up with a 2-point conversion. And then, unfortunately, the fact that they didn't have Talib, I would say, is the reason they lost that game. That game was a 3-point game, and really the touchdown wasn't necessary. Just Peters blew it, and that was the game clincher. But, that's just how I feel with that. I think the Rams are going to be fine, but you also have to keep in mind the Rams are going to be playing the Cardinals, who they've now beaten. I believe it was 66-0 their last 2 games, something like that. I mean, they've shut them out the last 2 games. Might be 63-0. Anyway, they've shut out Arizona the last 2 meetings this year, earlier in the year at the Coliseum, and then last year in London at Twickenham Stadium. And, I think this year they'll probably have no problem. I would have to imagine the Rams become the scariest team for a Cardinals team that's desperately trying to win a football game, because we've never seen the Rams come off 2 losses back-to-back with Sean McVay. So we don't know how they're going to react, and they could be out for blood. And then the next game, I think really, people expected them to sit their starters and everything. I would be shocked if they did, because, I think the Saints have another loss on their schedule, and maybe 2. Because, I don't love the Carolina Panthers, but the Panthers are not out of this at all. I know the Vikings won today, but the Vikings still, have to win. They pretty much have to win out. And to me, I think Carolina could win one of those games, against New Orleans, just the fact that you're playing the same opponent, almost back to back. And I think the way the Steelers played against Patriots today was kind of a wake-up call. Maybe, the Steelers can beat the Saints, and now you're looking at, the Saints fall into 4-loss team, and the Rams winning out, and they're a 3-win team, or a 3-loss team, and then boom, they get the number 1 seed. But regardless, right now, it's all about making sure they have a bye, because they pretty much have to win out now, because they lost to the Bears, albeit that was the